Hey there, fellow car enthusiasts. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into all things automotive. Ignition system problems can be frustrating and can leave you stranded on the side of the road. But don't worry, in today's video, we'll be discussing common car ignition system problems and, more importantly, their remedies. So, if you've been experiencing any issues with your car's ignition, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Understanding the ignition system. Before we jump into the problems and solutions, let's quickly go over the basics of a car's ignition system. The ignition system is responsible for starting the engine and keeping it running smoothly. It consists of several components, including the battery, ignition switch, starter motor, ignition coil, spark plugs, and more. Problem 1, weak or dead battery. One of the most common ignition system problems is a weak or dead battery. If you're experiencing difficulty starting your car or notice dim lights, it could be a sign of a battery issue. The remedy for this problem is to either recharge or replace the battery, depending on its condition. Problem 2, faulty ignition switch. Another common problem is a faulty ignition switch. If you're having trouble turning the key or the engine randomly shuts off while driving, it might be due to a malfunctioning ignition switch. In such cases, replacing the ignition switch is usually the best solution. Problem 3, worn-out spark plugs. Spark plugs are an essential part of the ignition system, and they need to be replaced regularly. Worn-out spark plugs can cause misfires, rough idling, and decreased fuel efficiency. If you're experiencing any of these issues, it's time to check your spark plugs. The remedy is to clean them or replace them with new ones, following the manufacturer's recommendations. Problem 4, ignition coil failure. One of the most common ignition system problems is ignition coil failure. The ignition coil is responsible for sending power to the spark plugs, which ignite the fuel in the engine. Ignition coil failure can lead to engine misfires, stalling, and poor performance. If you're noticing these symptoms, it's likely that your ignition coil needs attention. Replacing the faulty ignition coil will help restore proper engine function. Problem 5, faulty starter motor. The starter motor is responsible for turning the engine over when you turn the key. A faulty starter motor can prevent your car from starting altogether. If you hear a clicking sound when turning the key or the engine doesn't crank, it's time to inspect the starter motor. Depending on its fault, repairing or replacing the motor is the solution. Problem 6. Corroded ignition switch. Over time, moisture and debris can cause corrosion in the ignition switch, leading to intermittent starting issues or a complete failure to start. Problem 7. Damaged or loose ignition wires. Ignition wires carry electrical current from the ignition switch to the spark plugs. Damaged or loose wires can disrupt this flow, preventing spark formation and causing starting problems. Problem 8. Failed starter relay. The starter relay acts as a switch, allowing the battery to provide the high voltage current needed to engage the starter motor. A faulty relay can prevent the starter motor from engaging, resulting in a no-start condition. Symptoms of ignition system problems. 1. No-start condition. The most obvious symptom is when your car fails to start when you turn the key. 2. Intermittent starting. The car may start sometimes but fail to start at other times, indicating an intermittent problem within the ignition system. 3. Grinding or clicking noise. A grinding or clicking noise when turning the key could indicate a worn-out or faulty starter motor or solenoid. 4. Dimming lights or stalling. Ignition system problems can also cause electrical issues, leading to dimming headlights or stalling while driving. Remedies for ignition system problems. 1. Clean or replace the ignition switch. Thoroughly clean the ignition switch or replace it if it's corroded or damaged. 2. Replace damaged or loose ignition wires. Inspect ignition wires for damage or loose connections. Replace any damaged or loose wires. 3. Test and replace ignition coil. Use a multimeter to test the ignition coil. If it's faulty, replace it with a new one. 4. Check and replace starter relay. Test the starter relay using a jumper wire. If it's faulty, replace it. 5. Inspect and repair starter motor. If the starter motor is the culprit, have it inspected and repaired by a qualified mechanic. Prevention tips. 1. Regular maintenance. Regular maintenance, including checking ignition system components, can help prevent problems. 2. Avoid corrosion. Protect the ignition switch from moisture and debris to minimize corrosion. 3. Use quality parts. When replacing ignition system components, opt for high-quality parts for reliable performance. 4. Prompt repairs. Address ignition system issues promptly to prevent further damage or breakdowns. In conclusion, ignition system problems are a common issue that car owners face. However, with proper maintenance and regular checkups, these problems can be avoided. If you do experience any of these problems, it's important to take your car to a qualified mechanic to diagnose and fix the issue. We hope that this video has been helpful in understanding some of the most common car ignition system problems and their remedies. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.